This is going to be a fantastic module because it's going to be 90% of it is going to be hands-on. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff. We're going to be playing with virtual machines, with templates, with a lot of different technologies. It's going to be a very hands-on module. So let's tackle some of the slides that I have prepared for you guys and get right to it. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what is a virtual machine. So to slap a definition on a virtual machine, you can think of it as a collection of virtual hardware that create a framework or a baseline that allows an operating system to be installed on it. Just like a physical machine requires certain components in order for the operating system to be installed, a virtual machine also requires certain virtual hardware components to be available so that when presented as a framework to this operating system, the operating system is not going to know the difference of whether or not it's being installed on virtual hardware or physical hardware. So that's what a virtual machine is in a nutshell, is a collection of virtual hardware that comprise a framework or a baseline that makes it easy for an operating system to be installed on it. Now, as you can see from the list that I have here, these are the supported operating systems that you can install on a virtual machine. Now, a virtual machine is also made up of certain files, of a discrete number of files or set of files that make it possible for the operating system to function. And the beauty of a virtual machine is that it's made up of a set of files. That's what makes it portable. That's what makes it mobile. That's what makes it easy to copy and move around from one host to another. That's what even makes it highly available, because you don't care if a hard drive dies. It's made up of files. You don't care if a virtual CPU dies. It's made up of files. As far as the virtual machines is concerned, it's just a configuration tweak. You take these files, throw them on a host, a physical host that's not experiencing a hardware problem, boom, bring the machine back up, and you're done. The only thing that can go wrong that you could probably not avoid in a virtual machine is if there's a problem with the guest operating system installation. Now, the same way there would be a problem within a physical machine if you had to sometimes, for example, we have to blow away the whole machine and just format it and start from scratch. If you're experiencing that type of problems where the problem is in the actual software, if you have a virus or adware or spyware or anything of that nature, then you would experience the same problems with a virtual machine as well, and you would have to do the same procedures and process that you would do on a physical machine. Now let's examine some of the virtual hardware that you can see in a virtual machine. Now, as I've been stressing all through this video, a virtual machine is going to have the same characteristics and components as a physical machine. And as you can see in the screen here, those are all characteristics and those are all components, physical components that you would typically see in a physical box. So in a virtual machine, you can have these components. You can have up to 4 IDE devices, CD or DVD-ROM, etc., etc. Now, in a virtual machine, you have virtual hardware that is absolutely required in order for you to construct the virtual machine, and then you have optional hardware that are sort of like add-ons that are not really required in order for you to make this virtual machine, to create this virtual machine. So the absolute must in any virtual machine is obviously a virtual CPU, memory, and a hard drive, or a virtual hard drive per se. Now, everything else you can think of as optional virtual hardware that you can add or remove as you see fit during the course of this virtual machine. During the VM creation, you're going to notice that we're going to get to a point where we have to select the virtual NIC. And you have several different adapters that you can choose from in order to enhance the performance of the virtual NIC and the virtual machine as a whole and as a result of your selection. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with the different types of virtual NICs that are available in order to make the best choice possible during the virtual machine creation, or in order to troubleshoot at a later time if that virtual machine is experiencing any type of performance problems. Then one of the things that you want to look at is definitely the virtual NIC. So we're going to start off with the first virtual NIC that was presented, which is known as VLANs, otherwise known as PCNet32, which is an emulation of an AMD PCNet32 LANs adapter. Now, what this does is, first of all, you don't need to install any kind of VMware tools in order to use this virtual NIC inside of your virtual machine. It's supported by most 32-bit operating system, with the exception of Windows Vista and anything higher than Windows Vista. With regards to the VLANs drivers are provided by the actual guest operating system, and that's why you don't need the VMware tools. Now, the second type of virtual NIC adapter that's available is known as the VMX Net, and you'll notice that there's going to be different generations of this adapter because this is an adapter that VMware wrote, and you'll notice that there's generation 2 and generation 3, and we'll talk about those in a second. So VMX Net provides a much better performance as far as the adapter is concerned. It will give you fantastic performance over what you get with just a traditional VLANs, but it also requires the VMware tools, and as you might have guessed, the VMware tools are what's going to install this driver and enhance the performance of the virtual machine. And then you have the flexible adapter. The flexible adapter is kind of interesting. If the virtual machine doesn't have the VMware tools installed on it, then the flexible adapter automatically reverts to the VLANs adapter. If VMware tools get installed on the actual VM, then the flexible adapter becomes a VMX Net adapter. Now the flexible adapter is used with ESX 3.x and higher. Now the E1000 supports 64-bit operating systems and 32-bit operating systems. It's an emulation of the Intel E1000. It obviously requires the VMware tools in order to provide the right driver and provides significant performance increase. Now, the second generation of the VMX Net, VMX Net 2, also known as Enhanced VMX Net, supports advanced networking technologies such as jumbo frames and obviously requires the VMware tools. Now, the third generation of VMX Net, known as VMX Net 3, supports advanced networking functionality such as TCP segmentation offloading with IP version 6. It supports VLAN offloading. It also supports the VM Direct Path technology. So I wanted to give you just a quick overview, quick summary of what these NICs do in order to make it easy for you to choose the right NIC when it comes time to create the virtual machine when we get to the demonstration part of this module. Let's focus our attention now on what the virtual machine files mean. So these are the construct, what the virtual machine is made up of. So let's break them down and see what each and every one of them is. So to start off, we have the VMX or the .vmx file. This is the configuration file. This holds how the virtual machine is built, how it's constructed. Think of it as the blueprint to the virtual machine. This is where you're going to find out how many vCPUs there is, how much memory is allocated, what the size of the hard drive is, so on and so forth. Then you have the vmdk file. Now this is the file that provides information about the hard drive. Now the actual hard drive file, the file that contains all the data, is flat.vmdk. So what we've done in this list here is we've put a dot or a dash. So the name of the VM .vmx, name of the VM .vmdk, name of the VM dash flat .vmdk would be the actual virtual hard drive that contains all the actual data for this VM. The NVRAM is the BIOS for a VM, and then you have vmware.log, which is the current VM log. vmware-number.log is an older VM log. Then you have the .vswp, which is the VMware swap or the virtual machine swap file. Then you have the .vmsd, which provides information about snapshots, and we'll be talking about those in this module. Alright, now in this next slide I'm going to show you a typical configuration file for a VM. This is what the VMX file would look like. Now once we start creating a virtual machine, I'll actually launch one of those configuration files and show you how it looks like, but I wanted to put a few snapshots here within the slides so that you guys have an idea about what we're talking about when we say VMX and what the configuration file looks like. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and minimize the slides here and let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to log on to Virtual Center. We're at the home screen. Now there are two places where you can create virtual machines. You can create virtual machines under the hosts and clusters, or you can create them under VMs and templates. This is just going to be a force of habit to which view you prefer as to creating your virtual machine. I'm going to go into VMs and templates. I'm going to right click on this VM upgrades folder here, just to adhere to best practices and put virtual machines under folders even if this is not the permanent folder. I'm going to drag down here to where it says new virtual machine, and you have two options. You can configure it via typical or custom. Now typical will give you less prompts and less selections. We're going to go with custom so that we can go through the full customized selection and get all the prompts. We're going to click on next to continue, and we're going to name this. So for the purposes of this example, I'm going to name this VM-FS01. Now you'll notice that I put VM with a dash, and this just is to create some sort of a naming convention. the VM will always precede the name, and that gives you an attribute. If later on you're trying to query it with an Active Directory, you can query everything that's VM, and then you can organize that under OUs or anything else that you need to do. So this gives you a good way to classify and organize your virtual machines. And you should have a naming convention for everything. Might as well have it for VM. In your environment, you can notate that or annotate that with a VM. It could be at the beginning, in the middle, or towards the end, just to specify. So we're going to click on Next to push forward here. Now we're going to select a host that we want to run this virtual machine initially on. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to go with ESX01. And I'm going to choose one of the two data stores that I have available to me here. Now on this screen you have the option of selecting Virtual Machine Hardware version 4 or Virtual Machine Hardware version 7. Now if you select version 7, then this virtual machine will not be able to function or run on an ESX3 environment. So anything prior to ESX4, this virtual machine will not be able to run. So if you still have ESX3 in the environment, if you're going through the upgrade, for example, and you're not done with the upgrade where there's still ESX3 and you have the potential to run this virtual machine on an ESX3 host, then you want to select version 4 of the VM hardware. If not, you can stick to version 7. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to keep it at 7. And here's where you get the option of selecting what guest operating system you're going to install on this virtual machine. You have all the Microsoft operating systems that are selected and or supported, and you'll notice you have a lot of them. I'm going to stick with Windows Server 2003 Standard Edition 32-bit, but you'll notice here you can also go with Linux, and you're going to get different flavors of Linux that are supported. Novell, Solaris, Other, etc. Now Other means that it's not listed here, but you still want to give it a shot, and you can start give it a name, and then you can base it off of something. So you can base it off of FreeBSD, DOS, etc. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to stick with the default Microsoft operating system here. Here's where you get to select how many virtual CPUs you want to associate with this virtual machine. Now I recommend you always start with one, and if the virtual machine is hungry for more processing or needs to be enhanced with more processing performance, then you can always go back into the settings and give it another CPU. And with vSphere now you can add CPUs on the fly, so you don't even need to take the guest operating system offline to do so. Now you have the option of giving it obviously 1 to 8. Now depending on the edition, the version of ESX that you have installed, you might not be able to give it up to 8 virtual CPUs. So 8 virtual CPUs are only supported with the Enterprise Plus edition of ESX. Anything else, you're going to go up to 4 virtual CPUs. So from standard all the way up to Enterprise, you get up to 4. You have the Foundation and the Essentials packs, etc. You need to check with the licensing module in order to see how many CPUs are supported with which edition of ESX. We're going to keep it at 1. We're going to click on Next. Now here's where you get to specify how much memory you want to give it. You can give a virtual machine up to 256 gig of memory. Again, that depends on the edition of ESX that you're using, so I strongly recommend you go back to the licensing module for that. I'm going to keep it at 1 gig for now. I'm going to click on Next. Whoops, we skipped the screen. So here's where you get to select how many NICs you want to add into this virtual machine. By default, you're going to get 1. You can always select more if you need to. Now, as far as NICs are concerned, the first thing you're going to notice is you can put it in a specific network. So in my case, I have either test or VLAN 213. So you can select which network you want to put the virtual machine in order to gain connectivity. Over here to the right, you'll notice that you have different adapters, and when we were talking during the presentation, I mentioned the different adapters that you have the option of choosing from. By default, it defaults to the E1000, but you can always choose the VMX Net3, for example. And if you add more than one virtual NIC, you'll notice that it adds another line, allows you to select again which network you want to attach it to, what type of virtual NIC you want to configure. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to stay with 1, and I'm going to stay with the default E1000 for now, and if performance needs it, I'll upgrade to the VMX Net 3. I'm going to click on Next. Here's where you get to choose the SCSI adapter that you want to use for the virtual disk. You obviously have the bus logic parallel, the LSI logical parallel, the LSI logic SAS, and then you have the VMware Paravirtual. The VMware Paravirtual is a paravirtualized SCSI adapter that enhances the performance of the virtual machine. So for those applications that require high I/O, you probably want to come back in here and select VMware Paravirtual. Now, if you're having your application set on the D drive, for example, and you're adding a second hard drive to this virtual machine, you can always select a different SCSI adapter for that particular hard drive to give it a better performance. So we're going to leave this at default for now. We're going to click on next, and over here you have the opportunity to either create a new virtual disk, use an existing virtual disk, attach a raw device mapping, which is grayed out, or do not create a disk. So if you want, let's start from the bottom. So if you want to create a virtual machine but you don't want to attach any kind of virtual disk to it, then you do not create disk, and when you don't create the disk, the virtual machine is going to come up without a virtual disk. Now you're going to ask, well, why in the world would I do that? Now, it's very simple. Let's say you were using some kind of technology like Citrix Provisioning Server, for example. Citrix Provisioning Server allows you to stream the virtual disk to your VM. So in this case, you don't need a virtual disk because it's going to stream it. All you need is a VM shell. You need the components that make up the virtual machine, like the CPU, the memory, and you'll need a NIC card. But you don't need an actual hard disk because the hard disk is going to be provided to you via a streaming technology. So in that case, you select do not create disk. Now the second option, raw device mapping, it's grayed out here because I don't have any LUNs that are attached to this ESX host that I can use. So what raw device mapping allows you to do, let's say you create a virtual machine that is intended to be a SQL server or an Exchange server, and you want it to get the best performance possible, and you have a very large disk. You're trying to attach a very large disk. Let's say you want to attach a 400 gig LUN to it. So instead of creating the 300 or 400 gig LUN on top of a VMFS volume, you give it a raw device mapping. So the same thing as you would today in a SQL server or an Exchange server, where you take a LUN and you attach it directly into that virtual machine, into that physical machine. You can create a LUN and directly attach it into that virtual machine. Now that virtual machine can format that LUN as NTFS and use it accordingly as local disk. So that's one way of taking care of large virtual machines that require large LUNs. Instead of formatting them as VMFS, you just attach the LUN directly into the virtual machine, format it accordingly. And if you want to use an existing virtual disk, again, if you're creating a virtual machine and you already have a virtual disk, or you're trying to attach a virtual disk that's available, you can browse to this virtual disk and attach it. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to create a new virtual disk. Now here you have the opportunity to select the virtual disk capacity. I'm going to leave it at default, and you'll see that you have two options. Now if you don't select any of these two options, what will happen is the virtual disk will be created in a default format, and the default format will allow the SAN, if you're using a SAN for example, the array on the SAN to do thin provisioning at the array level. Now if you select allow and commit space on demand thin provisioning, then you're doing thin provisioning based off of vSphere. So again, when we talked about thin provisioning, I mentioned the different types of thin provisioning that you can do. You can do thin provisioning at the vSphere level, and this is typically done for SANs or storage that don't support thin provisioning natively. ESX takes care of that, or vSphere takes care of that. For storage devices and SANs that do thin provisioning at the array level, I strongly recommend you keep it at the array level and let the SAN administrator deal with all of that. However, you'll notice that if I selected allocate and commit space on demand thin provisioning, the second option here automatically grays out, which means if you're doing thin provisioning, you cannot use this virtual machine in a fault tolerance environment. However, if I uncheck this, you'll notice that it automatically will support it. Now if I select the second option, which supports clustering features such as fault tolerance, what's going to happen here is it's going to commit the full 8 gig and it's going to zero all of it out. So this is known as the eager zero thick, where it consumes the full amount of disk based on what you've selected here. So I'm going to leave both of them unchecked, and you'll notice again that when you select that, then thin provisioning is not allowed, so vice versa here. So I'm going to keep this unchecked. Over here you have the option of either storing this virtual disk with the virtual machine files, or if you want to specify a different data store, you can do that and browse to that data store here. Now the reason you would want to do that is in some environments, some IT shops will always want, for example, the C drive of the virtual machine to be on specific data stores, and then the D drive of virtual machines to be on different data stores, and this is where you can specify and organize those files. I'm going to keep this at default for now. We're going to click on next. Over here you have the option of specifying where you want your virtual disk to be on the virtual device nodes. So by default you shouldn't have to touch this, but if you want to change where it's located or where it's connected, you can do that at the SCSI level, and if you have an IDE or if you're configuring an IDE, then you can do the same thing with IDE. Now, as far as the mode is concerned, you'll notice that independent mode is disabled. Independent mode, if you select independent mode, then it's incompatible with snapshotting, and we're going to talk about snapshots a little later on in this module. But if you do select independent, then you're going to automatically have two options. If you specify the persistent mode, then any changes you make to this virtual disk are automatically and permanently committed to this disk. You cannot unchange those. If you select the second option here, which is non-persistent, then any changes you make will be discarded as soon as you power off or reboot this machine. It'll revert back to where this virtual disk was prior to you making these changes. So I'm going to keep this unchecked for now. I'm going to click on next. And that's it. At this point, it gives you a summary of what you've configured during this wizard. It allows you to edit the virtual machine settings as soon as you click on the finish button. So I'm going to keep this unchecked. We're going to click on finish here to go ahead and initialize this virtual machine and create it. Now, after the VM has been created, if you wanted to modify any of its settings, you can always right click on it and drag down to where it says edit settings. And you're going to notice here there are certain settings that you'll be able to modify while the virtual machine is powered on, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little bit. And there are certain other settings that you won't be able to modify unless the virtual machine is powered off. So for example, memory is one of those options that you can modify while the virtual machine is powered on. So is CPU. And obviously you can always add an additional hard drive. Now we're going to take a look at the different settings that you can add or not while the machine is powered on. But I want to come in here to draw your attention to the CD-ROM here, because we're going to need that in order to attach an ISO or attach a CD or DVD-ROM in order to boot our virtual machine into the media it needs in order to install the operating system. So when you select the CD DVD drive here, you're going to notice on the right that you have different options of connecting the CD DVD. Now the client device, this means that if, for example, you've installed the vSphere client on your desktop and you're connecting using the vSphere client from your desktop, then the CD-ROM device or DVD-ROM device that you have on your desktop is automatically passed through to the virtual machine, and you can install into the guest operating system that way. The second option here is the host device, which means the ESX host that this virtual machine is initially configured or created on can be used as the media. And the third option is the data store ISO file. Now with data store ISO file, you can browse to the different data store where you've uploaded or copied ISOs that you can use as the media for this virtual machine. Now let's open a bracket here and talk a little bit about ISO management. Now every organization typically has a location on the network somewhere where they put all of their files, all of their applications, etc., even ISOs or executables. Now when you branch out into an ESX environment or an virtual infrastructure environment, now you need ISOs to be accessible from these ESX hosts. So how do you do it? How do you manage ISO environments? Now I've seen a lot of environments where they duplicate everything that they have on the network somewhere into the ESX environment in order to provide access to that. So now you have this data in multiple places and you're consuming storage in multiple places. It's really unnecessary, and you have to keep both of them updated, deleting and adding and all that stuff. There is a better way of doing it. There's two ways or many different ways of doing that. Now obviously you can always take the easy way, which is the client device or the host device, put the CD-ROM in there, but that becomes annoying because first of all the CD is going to be slower, second of all you can't always run to the data center to use the host device. So you need an easier way of doing this ISO. There's two ways that I recommend. You can obviously always have a NAS device that has all of your applications on it, whether it's for the virtual infrastructure environment or if it's for your just regular environment. You can have the NAS and you can share amongst the two, and if you have a data store that's a NAS, you can always select it here and then browse to it and just browse to the ISO that you need. So for example, let's assume if this was our NFS, you can always double click on VM images and you'll notice that all of your ISOs would be listed down here. Now we don't have anything in there, so it's not going to show up. Now the other option would be to mount an SMB volume from within your ESX host. Now SMB is the typical Windows share. So you can, if you have your applications today on a file server, on a Windows file server somewhere, there is no reason why you can't make that share available to your ESX environment. Now this is typical if you're using ESX with the service console, because that allows you to do the mount commands, and I'm going to demonstrate in a second here how you can mount from within an ESX4 server. So again, the typical or the easiest way to do this would be to have a NAS device, and that NAS device can be shared among your regular environment and your virtual infrastructure. And if NAS is not available, then you can always mount your existing share that's on a Windows file system somewhere into your ESX and give them access that way. Now the reason you would want to do that is it's easier to manage a Windows share than it is to manage an ESX data store. And I'll show you, for example, if you wanted to use a data store that is not NAS, just a regular data store that you've dedicated just for your ISO images, let me show you where and how you can do that. There's several different tools you can use to access the data store. You can use Veeam Fast SCP. That's a tool that you can download from veeam.com that allows you to connect to the data stores from a Windows machine and transfer files. But if you just wanted to use the native tools that came with vSphere, you can always click on Home here, and we're going to go into Data Stores. And I've expanded Michigan here. You can right click on this data store, say go to browse the data store, and over here you have the option of uploading files to this data store. So if this was the ISO repository for your environment, you can always click on it and do upload file or folder depending on what you want to do, and then just voila, you have your entire Windows operating system in front of you. You can scroll down to where you want and upload those files into ESX. That might take a little bit of time, and again, it's just annoying because now you have to keep two locations in sync and make sure you're constantly updating ISOs from one location to another. So let's go ahead and show you how you can mount an existing SMB, an existing Windows share, into ESX and use that to install the guest operating system. So I'm going to go back here to home, but I'm also going to minimize this screen so I can bring up PuTTY and actually log in, SSH into an ESX host. So we're going to launch PuTTY here, and we're going to connect to our ESX host. In our case, it's 10.12.99.151. We're going to log in as root and give it the root password, and then we're going to switch over to the root directory. Now remember during the installation module when we talked about the different mount points in Linux? Now because the service console in ESX is based off of a Linux iteration, we're going to have to create a mount point that we can use to connect to our CIFS or SMB directory. So the first thing you want to do is figure out where you want to create this. In my case, I want to create it under VM images. So we're going to browse there, and then we're going to use the command mkdir, which stands for make directory, and we're going to call it ISO. And then the equivalent of a dir or dir with DOS or in the Windows world in Linux would be ls, so you can do an ls to list the contents of this directory. Now the second thing we want to do is we want to mount the Windows share that we have, and to do that we're going to use the command mount. We're going to use -t, and -t stands for the type, so we're specifying the type of file system we're trying to mount, and in this case we're going to do CIFS or CIFS. Now for those of you that have been following our CBTs for a while, you'll notice that in the older version of the CBT, if you were to look this up, we were mounting SMBFS. Now if you would try to mount SMBFS here, you would get an error because ESX4 doesn't support that command. So the alternative to the command that we're about to put on screen, the only difference is instead of mounting it using SMBFS, we're mounting it using CIFS or CIFS. Now we're going to do a space -o, then we're going to give it a username, and for the purposes of this demonstration we're using the administrator username. And keep in mind here, the username that you're specifying here is a username that can authenticate against the target. So this username should be able to log in to the Windows file share that you're trying to create. And we're going to do a space here. And now we want to point it towards that server and towards that file share. So in my case, I'm going to do //10.12.100.45 / the share name, which in my case is ISO, and I want to mount it. Now we need to tell it where you want to mount this. So we're going to mount it inside of VM images /ISO, and we're going to hit enter. Now it's prompting you for a password here. Now you have to give it the password of the target destination where you're trying to enter. Alright, so we got a connection refused. Now obviously something's wrong here. Now what do we need to do? Now for those of you that don't know, we actually have to enable the SMB client within the ESX host. So let's go ahead and enable the SMB client within the ESX host and then try this again. Alright, so we're going to select the host that we've been working with. We're going to click on the configuration tab here and we're going to scroll down to where it says the security profile. And then we're going to click on the properties. And we want to make sure that the SMB client is enabled. So we're going to scroll down a little bit until we see the SMB client. And there it is. So we're going to select that. And we're going to click on OK. And then we're going to try the command that we used in PuTTY again. Alright, now let's hit the up arrow and try this command one more time. And voila, would you take a look at that? Let's see if we can now do an ls and see if we can browse the contents of this directory. Now take a look at that. Now these are files that are on our Windows share. So from here on what we can do is we can use these files to connect to any one of our VMs, and if we need to delete anything or add anything, we don't have to do it through ESX. We can control all of this from Windows, where we can upload and download much easier and in a much automated fashion than we can within a virtual infrastructure. So there you go. Now we can connect the virtual machine we created to one of these ISO files and install the guest operating system, which is what we're going to do. Let's go back into Virtual Center and now try to install a guest operating system on the newly created virtual machine. So let's go ahead and install a guest operating system on our virtual machine. So I'm going to go to Control-Shift-V here. And there it is. We're going to right click on it. We're going to go down to Edit Settings. I'm going to click on the CD DVD. We'll select the data store. We're going to browse. We're going to double click VM Images. And there's the ISO. We're going to double click on that. And then we're going to select the correct ISO file that we want to load inside of this virtual machine. I'm going to select the standard Windows 2003. Click OK. And we're going to make sure that it's connected at power on, because otherwise this device won't be connected when the virtual machine powers on, and in that case it won't boot into memory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on OK. And let's go ahead and power this baby up. Click on power, power on, and then what we're going to do is we're going to right click on it again, and we're going to drag down to where it says Open Console so we can see what's going on the console of this virtual machine. Alright, now I'm glad this happened. So what's happening here is, for some reason, the virtual machine can't find the CD-ROM. Probably because the CD-ROM isn't the first device in the BIOS of this virtual machine. It's trying to boot to the network directly. So it can't find the network, so obviously what's going to happen now is if you hit escape, it's going to fail, and then it's going to tell you that I have nowhere to go, operating system not found. So the way to resolve this is we want to reboot the virtual machine, and we want to be able to get into the BIOS. So I'm going to click on VM up here, power, and I'm going to do a reset. We're going to click on yes. You'll notice that it's way too quick. It goes by way too quick for us to hit F2. So what do? How do I slow down that screen in order to hit F2 and get into the BIOS of this thing? Now, first of all, I lost the mouse, so for those of you that haven't figured it out yet, the way to release the mouse before you install the VMware tools is to hold the Control-Alt, will release the mouse for you, and then we're going to scroll back up to VM, go back into Edit Settings here, we're going to go to Options, and we're going to find the boot options. So you'll notice in the boot options you can do one of two things. You can either set the delay time so you have enough time to hit F2 to say 15 milliseconds. Keep in mind this is in milliseconds, not in seconds. Or you can select this box here, which allows you to enter the BIOS automatically the next time this virtual machine reboots. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Click on OK. And we are going to reset this virtual machine one more time. I'm going to click on yes here. And voila. The next time it rebooted, it was entered automatically into the BIOS. So now we want to go and scroll over to where it says boot, and you want to select that the first boot order be your CD-ROM. So we're going to click, or we're going to hit the plus button a few times to make the CD-ROM the first, and then we're going to go back to exit. We're going to save the changes. I'm going to say yes, and then we're going to try this again. And voila, there you go. Now, from here on out, you can just hit enter and just go through the installation of this operating system the same way as you would in a regular operating system. So I'm going to click on quick. Now, we're not going to go through this exercise. You should know how to install Windows by now, but I just wanted to show you how to get to the point where you can install an operating system. From here on out, it's the same way as you would install an operating system on an actual physical machine. Alright, now that the operating system is up and running, let's go ahead and get into the virtual machine. Now there are two ways of trying to send the Control-Alt-Delete commands to this virtual machine. You can always click on the VM up here and scroll down to where it says Send Control-Alt-Delete, which is in Guest, and then you can click on Send Control-Alt-Delete, or if you want to do it my way, you can just click inside of the window and then do Control-Alt-Insert, and that will send the Send Control-Alt-Delete command immediately. Now once you've logged in, you're going to notice that you have a crappy mouse driver. You need to install the VMware tools. The first thing you see that the display driver is messed up, so the first thing we want to do is we want to install the VMware tools. Now to install the VMware tools, we're going to click up here on VM, and then we're going to drag down to Guest, and we're going to do an Install Upgrade VMware Tools, and we're going to say OK. Now, it is necessary to install the VMware tools because in addition to giving you device drivers, it also gives you a virtual machine heartbeat that allows the virtual machine to continue to communicate with the ESX host, make sure that it's up and running and that it's functioning properly. It gives you improved mouse. It gives you memory management, and we're going to talk about ballooning and some of the other memory functionality that you get with ESX, like transparent page sharing, which is just fantastic. It gives you support for quiescing a file system. It gives you time synchronization abilities. It gives you the ability to gracefully shut down a virtual machine, and that's very important. We're going to take a look at that in a second here. Now we're going to acknowledge the display settings that they're not working. You're going to bear with me with the mouse here because it's a little annoying. We're going to click on Next. We're going to do a typical install. We're going to go ahead and install it. And you'll notice after the VMware tools have been installed, I'll be able to get in and out of the VMware or the VM window without actually having to hit the Control-Alt. So that's one of the advantages you get also with the VMware tools. You'll also notice that the mouse will start to respond much better, and you'll get a better graphics display, and you'll also be able to select a better virtual network adapter, virtual network interface card. Now it's detected that the hardware acceleration is not enabled. It is recommended that you enable the hardware acceleration. So if I click on yes here, it's going to bring up also a text file that walks you through the steps of enabling the hardware accelerator. So for the purposes of this demonstration, you guys can go ahead and read the text file if you want. For me, I'm just going to close it, and we're actually going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to click on finish just to exit out of this wizard. We're going to say no to the reboot, not just yet, and then we're going to click on advanced here. We're going to go up all the way to where it says troubleshooting or troubleshoot, and we're going to take the slider all the way to the right in order to enable the hardware acceleration. I'm going to increase the dimensions of this screen a little bit to about 1024 by 768 so we have a little more room to work. And there you go, it'll automatically adjust it. We're going to click on yes, and we're going to click on OK. Now let's go ahead and reboot this virtual machine. Alright, so we're going to log back into this virtual machine here. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the mouse now reacts and behaves or is much more responsive, and we get a much better user experience than we did before we installed the VMware tools. And you also notice that the VMware tools now have an icon down here in the taskbar next to the clock. If you double click on that icon, you're going to get some more settings that you can configure for VMware tools. So let's go through these. Now the first one is time synchronization between the virtual machine and the ESX server. Now the only time you would want to enable this is if your virtual machine isn't part of a Windows domain. And the reason I say that is every machine that's part of a Windows domain will automatically sync its time with the PDC emulator. Now the PDC emulator is a FSMA role that one of the domain controllers in your environment holds, and that's what takes care of time synchronization. Now the second option here is to show the VMware tools icon in the taskbar. If you uncheck that, then you won't see this icon anymore. And the third one is notify of upgrade availability. So if VMware tools have an upgrade package that was downloaded, it'll notify you that hey, you need to upgrade your VMware tools because there's a new package that's available, or if your VMware tools are out of date, then you get notified as well. Click on the Devices tab here. You have the ability of enabling and disabling certain devices by checking or unchecking the boxes next to them. You have the ability of running certain scripts if you need to. And then we're going to click on shared folders here. Shared folders are enabled on the host, so you can enable those on the host and have the shared folders sync up through VMware tools. And let's go into the shrink tab. Allows you to shrink the C drive if you need to, and you can prepare to shrink that. And then you have the about, which just gives you the version numbers, etc. So information about VMware tools. So we're going to click on OK to exit out of here. In addition to all of this, what VMware or VMware Tools gives you is the ability to gracefully shut down virtual machine. So let's go ahead and close this console here, and if we want to right click on this virtual machine, let's talk a little bit about the power options. So you have several different power options. You can do power on and power off. Now, considering that this virtual machine is powered on, the only available option would be power off. Now, power off is the equivalent of pulling the plug out of the wall on a physical machine. It will immediately shut it down. Suspend is when you put the virtual machine into suspend mode, where it's still running but at consuming the least amount of resources, but your desktop is still up but it's suspended. And then you have reset. Reset is the equivalent of holding the reset button on the actual physical machine, so it's kind of like a soft power on, power off, but it immediately restarts the machine, the virtual machine. Shutdown guest means that it's going to do a graceful shutdown of your operating system. So it's the equivalent of clicking on Start, Shutdown in Windows, and shutting it down gracefully. And then you have Restart the guest, and that's the equivalent of initiating a restart from within your operating system. Again, it is a graceful restart, so you're not forcefully shutting down the operating system. It will actually initiate the restart command within the operating system. So those are some of the advantages that the VMware tools will give you, is the ability to control that virtual machine, especially its power on and power off options, power options, in order to do graceful shutdowns and restarts. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about importing virtual machines and virtual appliances into your inventory. Let's start with virtual machines. Let's say for whatever reason you have virtual machines that are on your data store that you want to import into your inventory. So the actual virtual machine exists. For example, let's say you're restoring a virtual machine from backup, and you have it in your data store but it's not showing up in your inventory. And let me show you how we can do this. Let's go ahead and power down vmfso1, and we're going to do this via a graceful shutting down of the guest operating system. And you'll notice here, since we're on the subject, let's go ahead and open the console. You'll notice how the operating system is being gracefully shut down. Actually, it shut it down pretty quickly. So we're going to click on close. Let's go ahead and right click on it. Now, there are two ways of removing this virtual machine from your inventory. You can click on remove from inventory, which will remove the virtual machine logically from the inventory. So it won't delete it, it'll just remove it. So it won't show up in your inventory anymore, but it'll still exist in the data store. Or if you're trying to completely get rid of this virtual machine, you can click on delete from disk, and it's actually going to wipe it out. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to remove it from inventory. And you'll notice that in a few seconds here, there you go, it's gone. Now, let's take back the example that we were talking about. Let's assume you wanted to import a virtual machine into your inventory that exists in the data store that you've restored from somewhere but doesn't show up in your inventory. The first thing we want to do is we want to browse the data store, and let's go ahead and do that. Let's go home here, and let's click on data stores, and then let's see on ESX01, let's take a look at the virtual machines that exist on here. So it's not here. Where is it? I mean, I need to be able to see this virtual machine. So again, what you're looking at here is the virtual machines that are still in the inventory. When you're trying to browse them through the data store, you'll see only the ones that have been added to the inventory. In order to see the ones that are in the data store but not added to inventory, what we're going to do is we're going to right click on it, and we're going to click on browse the data store, and this gives you direct access into the files that are on this data store. Now let's see if we can find it here. It's obviously not on this one, so we're going to close out. And we're going to do the same thing on the second data store. We're going to browse it, and you'll notice immediately here that there it is, vmfso1. So now we want to find the VMX file. Now again, the VMX file, based on the presentation we gave at the beginning of the module, is the configuration file. So that's the file you want to right click on, and we're going to click on add to inventory. Now it'll automatically populate the name of the virtual machine based on the VMX file. Now this is pretty cool, because in earlier versions of ESX, like ESX 3.5 and 3.0, when you were trying to add something to inventory, it wouldn't automatically populate the name. You would have to enter the name. So this is kind of pretty cool. It comes in handy. So I'm going to keep the default here. I'm going to keep it in the Michigan data center. I'm going to click on next, and I'm going to select that it sits on the ESX01. I'm going to click on next, and we're going to click on finish. And you'll notice that automatically it's been added back to the inventory. So if we do Control Shift H here, we can see this under the hosts and clusters, and if we do Control Shift V, which takes us back to the virtual machine inventory here, you'll be able to see it in the virtual machine inventory as well over here. Now let's talk a little bit about virtual appliances. What is a virtual appliance? You probably heard the term 1,000 times, but you don't know what a virtual appliance is. In very simple terms, virtual appliances are pre-configured virtual machines that vendors make available to you. So for example, I'll give you some examples. You have Citrix, for example. For those of you that are familiar with their products, they have the Access Gateway, which is sort of an SSL VPN. Now they deliver that, instead of having that in the form of an actual physical pizza box, now you have it as a virtual appliance that you can add in your virtual infrastructure and configure it and give access to it that way. You can have pre-configured Windows 2008 servers or 2003 servers that serve a certain purpose. So for example, you can download a domain controller. You'll download this virtual appliance into your virtual infrastructure. You power it on, it's already a domain controller. You can do the same thing for certain applications that are bundled with the necessary operating system. So you can get an Oracle database, for example, that's bundled with the right front end. Everything that you need for that application is on that virtual machine. You download it pre-configured, import it into your virtual infrastructure, power it on, IP it, do a few extra steps that you need to customize for your environment, and boom, you're up and running. So you don't need to install the operating system, configure the application, and after installing it, you don't have to worry about all that stuff. All you need to do, import it, power it on, configure the settings needed for your environment, and within a matter of minutes, you're up and running. Now that's pretty cool. And VMware has a marketplace now for virtual appliances. So you have these different vendors that can upload their appliances into the VMware marketplace, and you have the ability to download those virtual appliances from the VMware marketplace. So let's take a look at how you can get access to it. I can go up to File up here, and I can browse the virtual appliance marketplace and take a look at all these virtual appliances that you can download. So many different appliances here. This can come extremely in handy when you're trying to do stuff that's pre-configured, pre-compiled. This is great, and we're going to use virtual appliances several times during the course. So for example, if you jump right to the Cisco Nexus 1000V, you'll notice that we're downloading that in the form of an appliance. So that'll be able to help when you're viewing that module. You'll be able to relate back to what we were talking about here. So the last thing I want to mention here is that virtual appliances will typically follow the file extension format of OVF, which stands for Open Virtual Machine File System. This is a standard. It's quickly becoming a standard for virtual appliances, something that all vendors can kind of agree on, because today you have multiple extensions for every vendor that has a hypervisor. You have the VMX and VMDK with VMware. You have Microsoft has its own, Oracle has its own, etc. So OVF is kind of a standard that you can deploy virtual appliances with. And again, we're going to be deploying virtual appliances several times during the course, and so you'll get a feel for how to do that. We're going to click on Cancel here. Now, while we're going to deploy virtual appliances many times, just in case you were wondering, you can click on File here, and you can always come down to where it says Deploy OVF Template. Click on that, and that'll initiate the wizard that's needed to install or import an OVF virtual machine. So again, we're going to do this several times so you'll get a feel on how this works. Now, what if we wanted to add virtual hardware to our virtual machine? So I've powered on one of these virtual machines. It's a SQL server. We're going to right click on it, and we're going to drag down to where it says Edit Settings. Now we're going to click on the Add button up here, and you're going to notice that there are certain things that we can add while the virtual machine is powered on, and there are certain other things that we cannot add while the virtual machine is powered on. So one of the few things that we can add are some SCSI devices, hard disks, Ethernet adapters, and USB controllers. Those are the things we can add while the virtual machine is powered on. Everything else, which is grayed out, we can only add when the virtual machine is powered down. Now, in comparison to earlier versions of ESX, you'll notice that with ESX 3 and 3.5, the only thing that you could add while the virtual machine was powered on was a hard disk. So this is a significant improvement here. But I'm also sure some of you are wondering that, hey, Eli, you know, we saw during your trailer, that awesome trailer that you created, that you can do hot add of certain features such as the hot plug CPU and hot add of memory while the virtual machine is powered on. And we're noticing here that, you know, for example, the memory is grayed out, and if I click on the CPU is also grayed out. Well, that's because you have to enable those features in the virtual machine before you can actually take advantage of it. And the way you do that is we're going to go here to Options, and you'll notice that we have memory and CPU hot plug and hot add here, and it's grayed out. And the reason it's grayed out is because, first of all, they're disabled, but you can't enable it while the virtual machine is powered on. So what we're going to do is we're going to power this virtual machine off, and we're going to come back into the screen, enable it, and then try to do hot add and hot plug of virtual memory and virtual CPU. So let's do that. We're going to cancel out of here, and we're going to power down this virtual machine, and we're going to make sure we do that gracefully. So I'm going to do the power here. We're going to drag down to where it says shut down guest. Yes. Alright, now that the virtual machine is powered off, we're going to click on Edit Settings here, and then we're going to go to Options and scroll down to where it says Memory and CPU Hot Plug, and we're going to enable the memory hot add, and we're also going to enable CPU hot add. Now you're going to notice that certain terminology is a little different between the memory and the CPU. They have CPU hot plug, as you see up here, and then you have memory hot add. It pretty much means the same thing. All it's saying that you can add more memory, but you can plug more CPUs in it. But you'll notice down here it says enable CPU hot add. So even VMware can't really make up its mind as far as terminology is concerned. But for the purposes of just making sure that you guys have everything that you need, just keep in mind that the CPU is always referred to as hot plug, while the memory is always referred to as hot add. So now we're going to click on OK, and we're going to power on this virtual machine and see if we can hot add memory and hot plug CPU. And while this thing is powering on, let's take a look at vmfso1 and see if we can do the same thing for vmfso1. Now we're going to click in. vmfso1 is powered off, so let's go into Edit Settings here, and we're going to go into Options, Advanced, and whoops, we don't have that same option to enable memory and CPU hot add and hot plug on vmfso1. Can anyone tell me why? Bueller, anyone? There are certain guest operating systems that support hot add and hot plug, and certain other guest operating systems that will not. So for example, vmfso1 is Windows Server 2003 standard, which will not support that, while the SQL Server that we're working with here is a Windows Server 2008, which will support it, and it's a 64-bit operating system. So you want to make sure you understand which guest operating systems support hot add and hot plugs and which ones do not, in order for you to understand if you can take advantage of this great technology. I'll bring up a slide in a little bit here that shows you which operating systems you can hot add and which operating systems you can hot plug in. Now that this virtual machine has been powered back on, let's go ahead and open the console, and let's click on VM here and click down to where it says Edit Settings. You're going to notice that I have 4 gig available for this virtual machine. I'm going to up that to say 6 gig, and I'm going to take the CPUs from 4 all the way up to 6 CPUs. I'm going to click on OK. Now you're going to notice in this virtual center, or this virtual machine, if you open up the task manager, it still says 4 gig and you still show 4 virtual CPUs. And that's because it needs a reboot before it can actually show you that in the task manager. But in order for you to find out if the hot add took effect or not, we're going to right click, we're going to click on Manage, and we're going to go into the device manager and see if we can see them. We're going to click down here to where it says processors, and you'll notice that I now have 6 processors. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you'll also notice that you have the 2 new the memory modules are also been added, but they haven't been added in the task manager view, so you won't be able to see them in task manager, but they're there, and the virtual machine is taking advantage of them. This is a really cool way of adding virtual hardware in the form of a hot add and a hot plug. We're going to close out of here, and we're going to close the console on this virtual machine. Now while we're on the subject of adding stuff, let's go ahead and add a raw device mapping or raw disk mapping to one of our virtual machines and see how that works. Now as I was telling you before, sometimes it makes more sense to add a LUN directly into the virtual machine rather than provision it as a VMDK or a virtual disk. Now to do that, we're going to pick on this virtual machine. We're going to click Actually, let's open the console of this virtual machine. And you'll notice that it's just a standard Windows 2003. There's nothing special there. We're going to click on VM and we're going to drag down to Edit Settings. And then we're going to click on Add. Now, one of the things that you can hot add is obviously a hard disk. We're going to click on it, and this will put you back into the same wizard that it put you in when you were originally creating the virtual machine when we went through the exercise. Now, you'll notice we have three options here. You can create a new virtual disk, and it goes through the same procedure that we went through, or you can add an existing disk if you wanted to, if there was an existing disk in one of the data stores that you wanted to add, or you can add a raw device mapping. Now again, a raw device mapping makes sense, for example, if all of a sudden your SQL administrator is telling you that I need a 200 gig LUN attached to a virtual machine. It makes no sense to go ahead and create a virtual disk on a VMFS volume that's 200 gig in size. So in that case, what you would do is the same thing that you would do in the physical world. You would go to your SAN administrator, you would carve up a LUN, and then you would take this LUN and attach it directly into the virtual machine as a raw device mapping. Now the virtual machine is going to treat this as a device, as a local device, and it's going to format it as such. So it'll format it, in our case, as NTFS. So let's take a look. Let's go ahead and click on Next. And you'll notice that I have two LUNs available here, each for about 10 gig in size. So I'm going to go ahead and select the first one. Click Next. Now, here it's asking you, what do you want to do with this LUN? Do you want to store it with the virtual machine files, or do you want to specify a different data store to store this in? Now, keep in mind, you're not actually storing the LUN, but you're just storing the pointer files to that LUN. So the virtual machine, as part of its configuration files, it needs to know that there's a raw device mapping attached to this virtual machine, so it will create pointer files. So it's basically asking you here, where do you want me to store these pointer files? For the purpose of this example, I'm going to keep them with the virtual machine. I'm going to click on Next. And now we get to what do you want to do with the compatibility as far as this raw device mapping is concerned? Do you want to treat it strictly as physical, or do you want to treat it as virtual? And the difference here is, with a physical, you're treating this thing purely as a physical disk. With virtual, if you select virtual, then you're allowing this disk to take advantage of snapshots and other advanced functionality. In my opinion, and I might be wrong here, it's just a matter of opinion, if you're doing a raw device mapping, then you want to do physical. You don't want to add any virtual and take advantage of any snapshotting. You're doing this for the purposes of taking advantage of the full physical and pure layer. So at that point, there's no point in doing virtual. So I'm going to keep this at physical. Click on Next to continue. And I'm going to keep this at default unless there's a need to change it. There shouldn't be any. But if there is, this is where you would change it. Click on Next and Finish. Now we're going to click on OK here. And let's go into Device Manager and see how this virtual machine is treating this new virtual disk that's been added to it. We're going to click on Disk Management here. And you'll notice that it already added it. All you have to do at this point, right click on it, New Partition. We're going to click on Next. And we're going to click on Primary Partition. I'm just going to go through this wizard as if I was adding regular hardware. Finish. Bada bing, bada boom. You just added a raw device mapping that, as far as this virtual machine is concerned, is being treated as local disk. It doesn't know where it's coming from. It doesn't see any difference, except this will have different types of performance, and you just format it as NTFS. So I'm going to actually click to close out of here. Now let's take a look at the different operating systems and which operating systems you can do a hot add and hot plug as far as the memory and the CPU are concerned. So I've listed the operating systems here on the left, and I've created this column. I'm not going to go through and read all of these for you. You guys can feel free to pause the video and study the table here that shows you what you can and cannot do with the different types of operating systems. Now keep in mind, you probably want to always double check this table, because as of this recording, this has been up to date. Now with the release of different updates for ESX4 and vSphere, this might change. So just keep updating some of this stuff and just double check that this information in the table is accurate, especially if you're taking any kind of exam for the VMware Certified Professional, because this constantly changes depending on the updates that come out. How about we start talking a little bit about templates? Templates are gold images of virtual machines that you've created. So in the physical world, what we used to do is we used to create a physical machine, install the operating system, install all the patches, all the applications, and make it as perfect as we can make it, and then take a ghost image of it or use some kind of tool to image this physical machine and store it. And we use that to deploy multiple or several other physical servers so that they will all be standardized. The problem with this physical image that we have is every time you had a new model of hardware, now you needed to create a different image to support this new model of hardware. Well, with virtual machines, you don't need to do that anymore. You create one virtual machine, you configure it the way you want it, you make it perfect, and then you create a template out of it. And that template gives you the ability to deploy as many virtual machines as you want and keep a standardized image across the board. And you don't care if you have different models of hardware that is underlying. So you don't care what the host is, because that's the power of using virtualization and virtual machines, is the mobility and the flexibility of using it. So how do you create a template? A template is very easily created. So first of all, the way you create a template is you create the virtual machine the same traditional way we've been doing it so far. You'll load it up with all the patches and applications that you want. You make it just the way you want, and then when it's ready, you can right click on it. So let's say we wanted to do vmfso1 into a template. We right click on it and we would drag down to where it says templates, and then you have two options. You can clone the existing virtual machine into a template, or you can convert the virtual machine into a template. Now obviously convert virtual machine to template is grayed out because this virtual machine is powered on. So let's go ahead and shut down the guest on this operating system or on this virtual machine and see if we can convert it into a template. And you'll notice that convert to template has automatically been added as one of the features. But let's go back into the menu here. We're going to right click, we're going to drag down to template, and you'll notice here that the convert to template has now been enabled. So again, there's two ways of creating this as a template. If you want to keep this as a virtual machine because you're using it, or you want to continue to use it, you can clone to template, so it'll take an image or a copy of this virtual machine the way it is and create a template out of it. Or if this virtual machine, your intention was to make it into a template all along, then what you can do is you can convert it into a template here, and that's what we're going to do. Now once you've converted this into a template, now you can deploy virtual machines, as many virtual machines as you want from this template. And deploying virtual machines is very easy. The way you do that is you come here, you can click on deploy virtual machine from this template, or you can right click on it and then you can deploy virtual machine from this template. And you'll notice here that there are several different options. You also have the convert to virtual machine. Now why would you want to convert a template back to a virtual machine? Now that's very simple. Let's assume that 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months from now, there are new updates, there are new patches to this application, and you want to update your gold image. So what you do is you come in here, you convert it back into a virtual machine, you create or you add all of the updates and patches that you want to this virtual machine, you shut it down and you convert it back into a template, and now you preserve that gold image in its pristine state. So it's really cool here. You can also clone it. Now, how do you view virtual machines, or how do you view templates within the data stores or within vSphere? Now that's very easy. Let's go back to hosts and clusters, and we're going to click on virtual machines, and you'll notice that the templates have a different icon. So the way you distinguish a template from a regular virtual machine is the virtual machines will have sort of these two square boxes, whereas the template will be identified as such, and you'll be able to tell that this is a template, and in that case you can right click on it and deploy virtual machines from it. Really cool stuff. Alright, let's convert our virtual machine back in, or our template back into a virtual machine. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to do a convert to virtual machine. I'm going to put it back in the mix here, so we're just going to add it on ESX01, and we're going to go through the wizard. And voila, it has just been converted back into a virtual machine. Now if you wanted to clone this virtual machine, all of a sudden you have the urge to have multiple, you want to deploy multiple virtual machines. You can either do it from templates, or if you don't want to do it from templates, you just have a virtual machine that you want to clone, you can always right click on it and drag down to where it says clone, and you can clone. And the beauty of clone is you can clone it while the virtual machine is powered on or powered off. Now once you get this, you can do VM, and you can do -fs02, for example. I'm going to click on next, choose where you want to put it. I'm just going to keep this on ESX01. Now while you're cloning it, and this is really important to note here, you have the ability to select what you want to do with the virtual disk. You can treat the virtual disk the same format as the source disk. So if the source disk was being thin provisioned, for example, then this maintains it. Or if you want to change the format of the virtual disk while you're cloning it, this would be the time to do it. You can select thin provisioning, or you can obviously select thick format here. And keep in mind, when I say thick format in this dialog box, it's going to allocate and commit the full size. So this is not the thick provisioning or the thick disk that you allow the array, your SAN array to do thin provisioning on. This is actually going to commit and zero out all of the space. So you got to be careful here. I would suggest either doing thin provisioning if that's your intention, or keeping it the same as the source. We're going to click on next. Now this is important, and I'm going to bring up a slide that details what you would need to do in order to do guest customization here. But in order for you to do the guest customization, so for example, if you wanted to upload any type of sysprep files in order to prepare the virtual machine, wipe out its identity, etc., add a serial number, or add your product key, then you can do the sysprep the same way you would do it for a physical machine into a virtual machine. And I'm going to bring up some slides here that will detail where you would need to copy those files on your virtual center server in order for you to take advantage of it. I'm going to click on next. And over here you can power on the virtual machine after its creation, or you can edit the virtual hardware. We're going to click on finish, and this is going to go through and go ahead clone this virtual machine. The guest customization wizard for Windows allows you to deploy virtual machines and prep them using something like a sysprep, where you wipe out the identity and then you reconfigure it with a new product key and you give it certain identity settings and features. But in order to do that, in order to customize Windows automatically via an answer file or via a wizard, for example, you would need to find the sysprep files and upload them into Virtual Center. And I'll show you during the demonstration where you can copy the sysprep files. Now, if you're using Linux, well, you don't have to do anything, because the Linux sysprep equivalent, for example, is an open source program, and the files can be included, the files are included with VMware, so there would be no extra steps needed on your part to do guest operating system customization if you're using Linux. So as I mentioned in the presentation, once you've copied the files, the sysprep files, into C Documents and Settings, All Users, Application Data, VMware Virtual Center, you'll notice I have a sysprep folder here. The guest customization will automatically be enabled. And let's take a look. So if I right click on the server down here and go to clone, I'm just going to go through defaults here. We're not actually going to name this, so just want to get to the customization wizard. We're going to click on next all the way. And you'll notice here that the guest customization wizard has now been enabled. So you can customize using the guest customization wizard, or you can customize using an existing customization specification, which means you've done this before and you've saved the file and you can do this again. So if you click on next, this will take you through the wizard in order to do a custom configuration of this virtual machine. And the wizard will kickstart and you can go through it. Very simple, very straightforward. It's the same as if you were doing it using the traditional methods with Microsoft. So I'm going to go ahead and click on cancel here. Now, while we're on the subject of cloning, and as I mentioned during the beginning of the module, there are certain things that you can do across data centers and certain other things that you cannot do across data centers. Cloning virtual machines is one of those things that you can do across multiple data centers. So you can take a virtual machine that's in the Chicago container, for example, and clone a virtual machine from our Wacker data center to our Michigan data center or to our London data center, so on and so forth. So with cloning, you can do stuff or functions across data centers. Now I want to talk to you guys a little bit about snapshots. Snapshots is one of those tools that allow you to preserve a virtual machine state at a certain point in time and allow you to keep reverting back to this state anytime you want. And snapshots are great because if you're testing applications, if you're testing patches, and you're not sure if they're going to work or not, in the physical world, that would almost be a fatal mistake. If you're trying it on a production machine and it doesn't work, you can back up, you can do restores, you can do all sorts of things, but the machine will never really go back to the same way it was. Well, that's the beauty of having a virtual infrastructure. Everything is in virtual. If you can think about it, you can actually do it. Now that was a cliche. So in the virtual world, what you can do is you can take a snapshot of a virtual machine at a given point in time and then continue to work. Apply the patch, apply an upgrade, whatever it is. And if that patch or upgrade doesn't work, fails, whatever the case might be for whatever reason, you can revert back to that point in time where you took the snapshot and discard all of the changes that you made from that point on. So it is a great way either for production environments if you're testing patches and you don't have time to do it in test, or for whatever the case might be. If you're testing it in production and you want to be able to revert to it, that gives you the option. Take a snapshot of the virtual machine before applying that patch or that upgrade. If it works, great, keep moving. If it doesn't work, revert back to the snapshot. No harm done, especially if you're make sure you're doing this on a weekend. For developers, this is great because sometimes they're testing their code and they need to go back to a certain point in time and test against the virtual machine state or the physical state of something, so they can keep reverting back to the same point in time. For someone like me, for example, that would be great because I build these virtual machines, I go through certain exercises, but then instead of rebuilding the virtual machine in order for me to go through this exercise with you guys on screen, all I have to do is revert back to that snapshot and boom, I can redo the exercise 100 times on the same virtual machine. It's been really helpful for me. So how do you create a snapshot? So you get the virtual machine to that point in time, you like it the way it is, you want to take a snapshot of it. For example, when I was doing one of my ESX upgrades in my lab environment, I took a snapshot of my SQL server, and I also took a snapshot of my virtual center server because I wanted to make sure if this upgrade doesn't go correctly, I want to be able to discard all those changes and go back to the same point in time. So I did that. So for example, let's take vmfs01, let's right click on it, and let's drag to where it says snapshots. And we can take a snapshot and let's name this snapshot gold. You can always give it a description, you can give it the date, the time, whatever is going to make this snapshot meaningful for you so that you know where you're going back to it. Because again, one of the things about snapshots is you're going to find yourself taking multiple snapshots. You'll take a snapshot that you're going to call gold, for example. In my case, I took several other snapshots. One of them is called gold Windows 2003. The other one is gold Windows 2003 with virtual center. And so there are different points in time that I can revert back to the snapshot and have the state of the virtual machine present something different to me. So if I wanted to wipe out everything, I would always go back to my standard Windows 2003 snapshot. And if I wanted to go back and wipe out everything, but I didn't want to have to reinstall Virtual Center again and again and again, I would go back in time to where I have the snapshot with Windows 2003 and Virtual Center, and so on and so forth. You get the glimpse of it. So I'm going to click on OK here. You can do it. You can take a snapshot while the virtual machine is powered on, so you don't have to worry about powering down the virtual machine in order to take a snapshot. Snapshots are usually quick. Snapshot files are preserved with the virtual machine files in the same directory, so the more snapshots you have, the more snapshot files you're going to have in the virtual machine directory, and those files are there to preserve the state of the virtual machine and figure out where and what point in time it needs to go back to. So now if you want to be able to manage snapshots, we're going to right click on FS01 here. We're going to drag down to where it says snapshot again, and we're going to go into Snapshot Manager, and you'll notice here that I already have a point in time called gold that I can revert back to. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do with a snapshot. So for example, let's open the console of FS01 and let's go ahead and log in, and I'm going to go ahead and create a file or two on the desktop here. Let's go ahead and create this file, and let's go ahead and create another file. Let's, for whatever reason, this is just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to create those two files, and now all of a sudden I don't want these two files. Consider these files an application upgrade or something that modified DLLs and registry entries and all sorts of stuff, and I want to revert back. So what I can do here is I can click on VM up here, and I'm going to drag down to where it says snapshot. We're going to go into the Snapshot Manager, and I'm going to select the gold, and I'm going to do go to. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to close. Now you'll notice that when I first took my snapshot, the virtual machine was powered off. So it took me back to that point in time, and it even saved the state of the virtual machine, which was powered off. Now let's go ahead and power that virtual machine back on. I want to do something else this time. I want to take a snapshot while the virtual machine is powered on and kind of go through the same exercise just so we have covered it from all different angles here, and that way we'll have a child snapshot as well to that gold image. I'm going to log in. Obviously you'll notice that the files are gone. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and I'm going to actually create those files, and now I'm going to take a snapshot of this image, and we're going to call this, let's call it gold with files. I'm going to click on OK. Alright, now what we're going to do is let's take these two files, let's pick on these two files today, and let's just create a bunch of other files, and all of a sudden now I've installed all these patches, so modified all this DLL. I don't want this. I want to go back to the virtual machine state where I only had these two files. So I'm going to click on VM up here. We're going to go down to Snapshot, and we're going to go to Snapshot Manager. And you'll notice that I now have 2 points in time that I can go back to. I can always go back to my gold here, which had my virtual machine in a powered down state, or I can go back to gold with files. So let's go back to gold with files, click on yes. And would you take a look at that? Within a matter of seconds, it wiped out everything. It took me back to the state of the virtual machine prior to making all these changes. And you can always click on the VM here, go to Snapshot again, Snapshot Manager. Now we want to go to the gold for whatever reason. We're going to click on Go To, yes, and you're going to notice that it's going to take me to that point in time automatically. I'm going to click on Close, and I'm going to close out of here. Snapshots are extremely useful. I can't tell you how many times snapshots have saved my life. It's a quick way of taking a backup. It's a quick way of taking precautionary measures. Usually in the IT world, we want to do everything very fast. We want to test everything. We don't want to take a backup that's going to take 3 or 4 hours, or a restore that's going to take 3 or 4 hours. This is the beauty of using virtual environments, and some people still try to fight or argue with me on making a case for not using virtual environments. But from an IT person's perspective, this is just it's beautiful, because it allows me to do things that I never thought I could do before, and it makes my life and my job so much more easier. I can test easier, I can deploy easier, and I have that peace of mind that I'm working with files. I can restore this anytime I want. I mean, I can download these virtual machines onto my local hard drive if I want to, and then test against them. If something happens, I can upload them back up. I mean, that's the flexibility that you get with a virtual infrastructure. So now let's talk about vApps. I'm sure many of you have heard about vApps, but nobody knows what they really are. What is a vApp? What's the difference between a vApp and a virtual machine, etc., etc.? So in many cases, virtual machines or machines in general have interdependencies. So for example, I'll give you a very quick example. Virtual Center needs a SQL server. It also needs a domain controller. Those are two components of the virtual center environment that always need to exist in order for virtual center to function properly. While I was building my lab, I always needed my SQL server, and I needed my domain controller in order to get the AD authentication, etc., etc. So what vApp allows you to do is it allows you to group 2 or more virtual machines into a vApp, thereby gathering all the necessary components to create that environment and grouping them in one object and applying security on them in one object. You have the ability to prioritize restart in one object. But the beauty of this is if that, let's say your boss walks in and it tells you, I need another vSphere environment right away. So instead of creating the SQL server on its own, creating the virtual center on its own, Active Directory on its own, etc., etc., you right-click that vApp, clone, boom. You just created all of the VMs, all of the interdependencies. You're up and running in a matter of minutes. Take a Citrix environment, for example, where you have many XenApp servers or many presentation servers that you need to bring up. You have 5 or 6 per environment. And I was at a client that brings up Citrix presentation servers or XenApp servers on demand. If they get a job, then that job will require 5 or 6 presentation servers. They would go in and clone them. Where if you had a vApp that says, okay, I have 5 presentation servers in this vApp, and I have all the SQL requirements, etc., etc., it's very easy to deploy. It's a couple of clicks and boom, you've deployed it. So let's go ahead and do it. You can deploy vApps in either the hosts and clusters view or the VMs and templates view. Since we're in here, we're just going to create it here. We're going to right click on this and we're going to drag down to where it says new vApp, and I'm going to call this vSphere. We're going to click on next. And over here, you have the ability, since you have more than one virtual machines, and we haven't talked about shares and memory allocation and limits yet, but we will. But this is where you can configure the CPU resources, the memory resources, the limits, the minimums, the maximums on this for the entire vApp. So you're treating it as a single object. You also have the ability, once we click on next here, let's click on finish. We'll go back into the properties in a second. So let's say for this particular vApp, what I want to do is I want to move, let's say this virtual center server here, we're going to move it under this vApp, and we're also going to take FSO2 and move it under here, and let's also take our SQL server and move it under this vApp. Now all of a sudden, this VApp has 3 virtual machines. If you right click on it and we drag down to where it says edit settings, we can tweak the settings of this virtual app. So right now we are in resources, so you can tweak the resources. If there was any properties, you can tweak the properties. IP allocation, it's set to fixed here. You have several different options that are grayed out at the moment because they're not configured for me. You can either do a transient where it's getting its IP address from the management network, or you can do DHCP. Again, for the purposes of my example, and in most cases you're going to be using fixed because these are typically servers that have a fixed IP address. And then you have advanced, where you can specify the product name, if this is a particular product bundle that you're creating. This is kind of like an appliance. If you think about it, the VApp is sort of like an internal appliance that you can create for your environment, and then your users become your customers. Your different business units become your customers. If they want a certain environment, then they download a VApp, and a VApp, the advantage of it, it's also treated and it's also packaged like an appliance. So it has the OVF file extension. So there's no reason why you can't treat it as an appliance that you internally are selling or are providing as a service to your users. So you can give all the relevant information here. You can click on OK, and you've just created your first VApp. Now VApps can also, if you right click on them, you can also slap the same amount of permissions. You'll notice here that it has all the same tabs that you're familiar with as far as the vSphere environment is concerned. Really cool stuff. So we've been talking about guided consolidation and Converter Enterprise all throughout this video, but we haven't had the chance yet to actually review them and to start the process of installing, configuring them, and using them. So let's take this opportunity to start off with guided consolidation. I'm going to move after this slide to Converter Enterprise. Once we're done with the lecture, we're going to dig back into the virtual infrastructure client, and we're going to do a guided consolidation, and we're going to convert some machines to ESX virtual machines. So guided consolidation, even though I've said this numerous times during the video, I'm going to repeat it, is basically a toned down version of a product that VMware has called Capacity Planner. Now what Capacity Planner does is, once you install it in your enterprise, it's going to query your physical servers for performance metrics. Then it's going to gather these performance metrics, it's going to analyze them, and it's going to give you a report of which servers are good virtualization candidates based on the performance metrics that it has collected. Now what guided consolidation does is the same thing, except Capacity Planner is going to do this for any type of server that's available in your environment. Guided consolidation will only do it for Windows servers, and will only do it up to 100 hosts, after which you will have to upgrade to Capacity Planner. The point of this, or the point that VMware is trying to do here, is an introduction into virtualization. It wants to ease your way into things and let you get a grasp and a feel to what you can do with this. Now the other nice thing about guided consolidation is that it ties very closely with Converter Enterprise. Now what Converter Enterprise is a tool that allows you to convert physical machines to ESX virtual machines, or other virtual machines to ESX virtual machines. Now when I say other virtual machines, it could be VMware Workstation, it could be Microsoft virtual servers, it could be a bunch of things. So another virtual machine, Converter Enterprise will convert that to an ESX working virtual machine. Now back to so with guided consolidation and Converter Enterprise, it's going to query physical servers or even virtual servers. It's going to return back a report of which servers are good candidates for our virtualization. And then guided consolidation is going to run a plan. It's going to give you a scenario of what it thinks you should do. So it's going to tell you, I found these servers and I'm recommending that you place these servers on the following ESX hosts. If you click on execute the plan, then it's going to take the physical machines, it's going to convert them to virtual machines, and it's going to place them on the actual hosts based on the plan that it gave you for reviewing. That is just fantastic. It's taking the process from the start to the end. It finds the physical machines, analyzes the physical machines based on performance metrics, tells you which physical machines are good candidates for virtualization, virtualizes these physical machines, places them on the correct ESX hosts, even within DRS, HA, and vMotion, and from start to finish, you're using a couple of wizards. Now, I can't help but giggle. I mean, VMware, every time they come up with a different tool, they just keep outdoing themselves, and the amount of automation that's gone into guided consolidation and integrating it with Converter Enterprise is nothing less than fantastic. And the nice thing about it actually works. You see how many different components there's here and how much error could occur. The fact of the matter, this process works wonderful from start to finish, and this is what makes this great. These tools, the software that we're using is such a powerful software that everything that's advertised actually works. Now, I can't say that for a lot of other, software vendors or software makers, which is why I've grown very attached to the quality of software that VMware releases. Now, that being said, let's take a look at what we need to get guided consolidation to work. Now, guided consolidation relies on two Windows services, VMware Capacity Planner service and the VMware Converter service. Now again, the VMware Capacity Planner is the service that you're going to use to analyze and query the other physical boxes on the network, and then the VMware Converter service is the one that's actually going to be doing the converting from physical to virtual or from virtual to virtual. Now, in order for guided consolidation to work properly, in order to configure it properly, we're going to need a user that is a member of the local administrators groups on the virtual center server. We're gonna need that user to have the log on as service user right. We're also gonna need access to Active Directory, and in order to have access to Active Directory, we need a user account that's a member of Active Directory. It could be a domain user, any user account that can query the AD for information, and we're gonna need administrative rights on the hosts that we are about to analyze or query for performance metric results. So all of these requests or requirements can be met by creating a service account and making sure the service account is a member of the local administrators, giving him the logon as service, making sure he's a member of Active Directory, and this user would need to be a member of the administrators group on the machines that we're going to analyze and query. Now, that being said, let's take a look at the slide that talks about VMware Converter before we actually move on and do some real work, do some hands-on work. Now, Converter Enterprise has several components. The first one being the server. Now, the server is what initiates the import-export of VMs. So you can import virtual machines into ESX, but you can also export them. So keep that in mind. The CLI, a command line interface, that is the component that carries out the commands issued by the server. So think of the CLI as the functional arm of the server that actually does all the dirty work. Now, the agent is what is either installed or running on the destination machines that are going to be converted. So this is the service that gets installed or is running on the machines that we are about to convert, is what prepares them to be converted into virtual machines. The client plugin is what modifies the virtual infrastructure, what modifies the VI client GUI in order to enable the plugin to it expanding the virtual infrastructure client's GUI. Now, Converter Enterprise typically and best practice calls for installing it on the same server as your virtual center server because they are very intimately connected. They need one another in order for Converter Enterprise to function properly. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that you can't install Converter Enterprise on a standalone or on a separate server or workstation. And if you choose to do that, even though I recommend that you don't, you're going to open yourself up to having more potential issues or troubleshooting. It doesn't take up that much resources on the virtual center server, and it does no harm to keep it there. But in the event that you want to put it on a standalone, I've provided you with a list of the minimum software or operating system requirements to do so. Alright, so let's not delay this anymore. Let's dig into the virtual infrastructure client. Let's take a look at guided consolidation, and let's take a look at Converter Enterprise. Alright, so I guess you guys want to do a physical to virtual migration. Is that what I'm hearing? You guys want to do a P2V, take a physical machine and convert it into a virtual machine? Alright, let's go ahead and do that. We're going to right click on our host here, and we're going to drag down to where it says import machine. I'm going to click on Next. Now you have the option here of importing a physical computer, a vSphere virtual machine, or other. For the purposes of the demo, we're going to stick with a physical machine. We're going to import 10.12.101.192. I'm going to give it the local administrator username and password. Now the first thing it's going to do is going to try to install the converter agent on this physical machine in order to process it. And voila. And the options here are you want to automatically uninstall the files when the import is successful, or you will manually uninstall it later. For the purpose of the example, we're going to keep it as is. We're going to click on yes. It's going to take a few minutes here to install the agent on the destination physical machine that you're trying to import. And voila, the agent has been installed. Now here you have the option of either importing both of you. It found that this destination physical machine has two drives, disk 0 and disk 0. One of them has 19, is a total of 19, almost 20 gig, and the other one's almost 50 gig. Now you can import both of them onto a single virtual disk that has two volumes, or you can select the spec to have separate disks for each volume, and that's what I'm going to do. And you can also change the size of the disk you're importing. Typically, physical machines have a lot of local disks, so you'll have 146 gig local disk with only 20 gig being utilized, and that's if you'll have a C drive with 20 gig utilized, and then you'll have a D drive with almost the same amount. So you don't want to import all of that into your virtual environment. So what you can do here is, from this arrow, you can click on it and you can change the size of the disk that you're importing. So you can maintain the size of 19.54. The minimum size that you can import is 12.21, or you can customize a size that you want to import. So let's say the minimum that you can import is 12. Assuming 12 is the used space, you can import 12, or you can leave some leeway. So you can add some space. So you can say, for example, here I want to import this as a 15 gig hard drive, and for the second one you want to do the same thing, right? You want to either maintain the minimum you can import is 7, or you can type in, again, I'll do another 15 here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to click on Next. So that customizes the file sizes that you're importing. That way you don't import all that free space or that blank space that you have on the local disks. We're going to click on accept the destination host that we've selected. Once you've converted this into a virtual machine, you can feel free to move it around. We're going to click Next, and we're going to name this virtual machine vmfs04. I like the FS today, so we're going to stick with that. We're going to keep it in the Michigan data center, and we're going to go ahead and leave it on ESX. We can make it part of a VApp if we wanted to, but we're going to keep it on ESX. We're going to click on Next. We're going to select the data store where we want to import it to. Now it's telling you here that I need 30 gig in order to import this machine. Since storage 1 has more disk space than storage 2, I'm going to keep it on storage 1. Alright, we're then going to select the NIC, where we want to add it, which VLAN, whether or not it's connected. We're going to click on Next. Now you have the option here if you want to install the VMware tools, if you want to do any customizing the identity of the virtual machine, if you want to remove all system restore checkpoints, etc., etc. I'm going to go ahead and select those two. I want to remove the checkpoints, and I want to actually also install VMware tools. I will customize the identity myself, so I'm going to click on Next. Here you have the option of running some type of scheduled task. If you have any type of scheduled task that you want to run either immediately or run at a later time, we're going to leave this as default. Click on Next. Now you can power on the virtual machine upon creation. Now keep in mind, if you're importing a virtual machine, that virtual machine, you can import it while the virtual machine is powered on. You do not need to power that virtual machine off in order to import it. Just be careful when you import it back. If you're adding it to a VLAN that has connectivity to the network, you're going to immediately have a name conflict and an IP conflict. So I would recommend you keep this off. Import the virtual machine, isolate it, power it on, clean it up, do all sorts of identity change, etc., etc., and then power it on at your convenience. We're going to click on Finish to start the conversion process. Alright, and there it is, folks. VM-FS04, it has been converted into a virtual machine. Now you can feel free to power it on, and just make sure you go through the virtual machine, uninstall any software, for example, that is hardware specific. So for example, if you're moving from a physical HP machine, go ahead and remove some of the HP Inside software that gets installed on the physical box, so that the virtual machine isn't cluttered with all of that. Configure it, IP it, name it the right way, join it to the domain. whatever you need to do, and then just go ahead and power it on, and there you go. Bada bing, bada boom. You just converted your first physical machine into a virtual machine. It's as easy as that. Alright, so let's go ahead and go through a guided consolidation. So on the home screen of your virtual center, you'll notice down here where it says Solutions and Applications, we want to click on Guided Consolidation. And you want to go through the configuration process. You want to make sure that all of the virtual center services have been started, including virtual center server itself, the virtual center converter server, and virtual center collector service. And you'll notice that all three of them are running. Those are needed. The collector service is needed to collect all the information off of the physical machine. The converter is needed when you want to go ahead and plan the consolidation of the physical machines that's going to import them. And then you have virtual center. Obviously the service has to be running. Now down here you can add your Active Directory domains. So if there are certain domains that you want this to crawl, you can always go ahead and click on add, and you can go ahead and add any kind of domains that you want. You'll notice that it's grayed out because I'm using this against production environments, so I'm going to go ahead and gray some of this out. I'm going to cancel out of here. Now once you've set the configurations the way you want, the tasks pane here is just going to tell you what tasks are going on, and you'll notice that we went ahead and imported one of our physical machines, which was a vmFS04, and it successfully imported that. You'll notice that with the green check mark here. And we're going to go ahead and work within the Analysis tab. We're going to click on Start Analysis. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a range of IP addresses. So let's do 10.12.101.193. Whoops. And let's do through 10.12.101.204. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Add to Analysis. It's going to prompt me for a username and password that will work across all of these boxes. So I'm going to go ahead and supply that. We're going to click on OK. And you'll notice in a second here that it's going to add all of these machines into the inventory. I'm going to click on Close. Now it's going to take a while here to gather the collection information on all of these systems, but it's kind of easy to gauge what's going to happen. So what we're going to have here is it's going to give you the IP address of every one of them, the CPU information, the memory information, the status, and then it's going to tell you the confidence level, how much of a virtualization candidate these machines are. So right now it's saying that they're low, and that's because it's still gathering system information. And then it's going to give you the CPU usage and the memory usage on every one of those physical machines. That way you can make a good judgment as to whether or not these would be good virtualization candidates. At this point, Guided Consolidation has gone through the list of servers that we provided, has listed the name, the IP address, the CPU information, the memory information, the status, and it also has listed the confidence factor for whether or not these machines are good candidates for virtualization. It's given you the CPU utilization, and it's given you the memory utilization on these boxes. So it's given you a good snapshot, good information, good performance metrics to allow you to judge whether or not these machines and these servers are good candidates for virtualization. And it also has given you, based on its own calculations, whether or not it thinks that these machines are good candidates for virtualization. And you'll notice that it came back here with a confidence level high. Now the way to do this, the way that guided consolidation works, it's really cool. So now that it's analyzed all of the information, now it's ready to consolidate. So now that you've given it all the information, it tells you, okay, these systems are ready to consolidate. It's going to now leverage converter, which we demonstrated earlier on, and it's going to convert these servers, these physical machines, into virtual machines. So the way to do this is, let's say you can select this one, for example, this first machine, and then you can come down here to where it says Plan Consolidation. Now before I click on Plan Consolidation, the only downside to this whole process is that you have to do it one at a time. You can't go through and do all of them at the same time, or kind of schedule them all. So you have to just go through them one at a time. So you can click on Plan Consolidation here. It's going to launch a wizard, and the wizard's going to take you through. So now the first thing it's going to ask you is, where do you want to consolidate these on, which data center, for example. So in our case, we're going to choose production, the production cluster, and that's going to give us a number of hosts that we can use, and that guided consolidation is going to use to determine which is the best host to place this physical box on once it's converted to a virtual machine. So I'm going to click on Next. And you'll notice here that it says guided consolidation is generating recommendations as to which host it thinks is the best one. So based on the calculations, it wants to place the VM after it's been converted onto this host. So we're going to accept, or you can accept it for now and then change it later. Once it's been converted to a virtual machine, you can always move it around. And actually, it's going to participate in DRS, so it will be moved around at some point. We're going to click on next, and then that's it. After this, as soon as I click on finish, what it's going to do is it's going to take this physical machine and it's going to try to convert it into a virtual machine using converter. So it's the same process as the P2V that we did earlier on, so we won't wait for it. I'm just going to click on finish, which will kickstart this process, but you guys have already seen how this works. So let's go ahead and cancel out of here. And folks, this brings us to the end of this long module. I hope it has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.